Hey guys, Board now back with you, and this is going to be a new television review. And on this video I will be reviewing the latest episode of The Outsider. So this is going to be the fourth episode. So we're really getting into the meat of the case in this one. It's of course the new HBO miniseries based on the recent Stephen King novel. And this episode is once again directed by Andrew Bernstein, as was last week's, and it's written by Richard Price, who is the main kind of showrunner, main writer, and he's written all the episodes up to now. What's interesting actually is I've looked ahead to some of the future episodes, and I know there's at least one or two, I think, which aren't written by Price. So that'll be interesting to see if they feel a bit different. And also there's a few different directors as well. There's an episode directed by not quite sure how you pronounce her name, but Kieran Kasama, who I done some really great films like The Invitation and also Destroyer. So I'm excited to see what the episode she directs is like. So the episode is called Quo Van El Coco, which is a title which you sort of find out the meaning of later on in the episode, quite late on actually, which is very intriguing. And it's another very intriguing, engrossing episode. I think part of the thing that this series has done is that I think it sort of sets you up thinking one thing, and I think for quite a lot of this episode I thought this might just be a lesser episode in terms of not too much happening, just little small bits here and there, and it's all about the little breadcrumbs, I think, and the incidental stuff which may mean something, may not. I suppose for any like really compelling mystery, it's kind of this idea that even the smallest stuff means something. It's just a case of what. But then over the course of the episode, it really grew. It really takes on a life of its own, and you think, oh, okay, this is really intriguing. And suddenly, it no longer feels like a bit of a lesser episode or less significant. So really good stuff. Again, we get plenty with Holly in this episode. She was obviously set up in the last episode. Really great character. Really intrigued to see more of her worldview and what she brings to the case, and you start to see in this episode just why she has this reputation and why she's a really great person to have on the case, because she seems to be able to connect dots that other people just wouldn't, and it's her unorthodox thinking which really starts bringing things together. But there's a couple of other like sort of interesting characters as well in this episode, characters who you saw in the last episode, and it kind of shows you how the show is appealing, the fact that even smaller insignificant characters sort of take on a life of their own, and they're more than just your average character. So we have the security guy who Holly interviewed in the last episode just about like the security tapes in the parking lot. He reappears in this episode, as does the receptionist, who obviously dismissed Holly as a reporter, and basically threatened her and said, unless you come back with one of the Maitland family, you can't get in to see Terry's father. And peculiarly, she didn't know that Terry had died. So we see her again in this episode, and she plays quite a big part. But I should talk about the opening scene, because the opening scene is one they come back to later, and it becomes important. So we see Heath, I think his name is, in a diner with this girl, and so they're having like breakfast, and things seem to be going well. Now Heath is the child killer who we found out about last week, where there's some similarities between his case and Terry's, and the child killer or supposed child killer who we saw commit suicide in his prison cell. So that's who Heath is. So at the start of this episode, we see what you assume is a flashback with him and the girl having breakfast in the diner, and it's a very brief scene, and then we go into like the credit bit. So it's going to come back to that, but we'll talk about the stuff happening with Holly in this episode. That seems the most obvious. So she updates Ralph on the child killer, on this other case and the similarities. So he obviously gives her the kind of permission to pursue this, but it also puts him on notice that these two cases might be linked, and so to try and reevaluate things on his end. But in what's quite an amusing scene in a way, Holly follows like the receptionist home, and out of nowhere, because she thinks Holly's like a weirdo or something, or gonna attack her, she reacts by sort of spraying pepper spray in her face, and Holly obviously freaks out. And it's this funny sort of scene because Holly says it could blind me, and the receptionist says, yeah, it's pepper spray, that's the point. And in the end, she helps her. Holly persuades her then, she's not a reporter, she's a private investigator, and she's there for those purposes. And obviously, because she's, hurt her with the pepper spray, she does take her in and help her. And that builds a little bit of a bond where they get to talking. But it's just that little lightness of touch in that scene with the pepper spray, which you do need those moments in these sorts of shows. But it opens up this character as well, the receptionist, who has this very kind of direct, matter-of-fact sort of tone about her. But she's quite a quirky little character in her own right. But as it turns out, Heath worked at the old people's home, and the receptionist starts telling her about Heath, and kind of then she doesn't believe then he killed the child that he's in there for, that he was in prison for, or that there's any connection to like the Terry Maitland case. But we also see in flashbacks, because she tells Holly then Heath did work with Terry's father, and that he says he sort of has an alibi, but then he did take some time off around the time that these murders happened. But we also see in a flashback that there was a collision between Terry and Heath. So it's possible that might have been the incident where Terry got the cut off the nurse, the male nurse. It sort of all adds up. But also the receptionist tells Holly then Heath never left, or the mother of Heath told her then Heath never left her side that whole week, the week he took off. So seems as though that's some sort of an alibi at least. So I think what we basically get here is more conflicting evidence kind of thing, because there's kind of evidence that could potentially make him the murderer, but also evidence that contradicts. So it's similar to the Terry situation, where there's conflicting evidence in both cases. There's like this sort of thing where they would have to be in two places at once to have committed the murder. So you can see all these things starting to tie together. What else do we get with Holly? So Holly, she gets in to see Terry's father. In the end, she kind of brings flowers, and I guess she sort of talks her way in. And to be honest, I mean, he says a lot of stuff, but a lot of it just seems gibberish. It just seems like the sort of stuff that I think because of his mental state, or it is like he is talking about an incident, but it's either something that's in his head or it maybe doesn't have much to do with the case. But the one important thing he says is that he didn't do it, and he seems to be talking about Terry, and he says, yeah, he fooled you, all sort of things. So that's an interesting line, which seems to suggest that the father knows something about what's been going on. Then we get the security guard and Holly, and we see that the security guard has a bit of a thing for Holly. Holly's taken a liking to her, and he says he can give her information, but only if she goes for a drink with him. And there's this sort of like bond between them, and I think what this show is doing is kind of linking all these different sort of outcasts. So there's like this natural connection between the security guy and Holly. So the security guy basically tells her over this drink that there was evidence linking Heath, like DNA type evidence, linking Heath to like the murder, but they also suspected it might be his brother because he has a twin brother, and obviously Heath had like an alibi. But lo and behold, his brother committed suicide. Well, not suicide, but he OD'd basically, so they couldn't really go any further with that. And this is what this episode starts to show, this sort of link where people involved in this with Heath, they all seem to die. So the mother dies in a car crash, which again is suspicious. She just drives out and she's like really speeding wildly and she crashes, so you could interpret that as some sort of suicide, the same way you could interpret what happened with Heath's brother. He conveniently overdoses, that could be seen as suicide. And there's more of that sort of stuff as the episode goes on with another case which I'll get to. So he obviously agrees to go out with Holly, or to speak to her as long as she goes for a drink with him. And then later on, he asks her for a nightcap. She like politely declines, but she kisses him out of the blue. So again, we're seeing the kind of social awkwardness of Holly, kind of the fact then she just, she declines the nightcap but then kisses him out of the blue without him expecting. So she doesn't do things the conventional way, but again it works quite well. She then goes off and has a drink anyway on her own, and she's like sort of picking the ear of like the bar lady, the waitress, kind of, and just talking to her about the case, which is pretty funny, try and get her opinion. And something, I can't remember what it was, but something that the waitress says sort of stirs something in Holly. And she pays up and leave. And she goes back to the receptionist's house, I can't remember the character's name, but she starts asking her about, was there something that, did Heath go somewhere around this time? And she says he went to New York. And she gives her this postcard. And on the postcard, there's like a mention of a girl who he met there. So Holly, again, we really see this advanced sort of thinking. Holly looks into this and looks into like cases, crimes around that time in New York. So this brings us up to this next case. And it's a case of these two twins who were killed. And this girl, Maria, has been arrested for it and put in prison. All the evidence points to her, and yet she has contact, or she had contact with Heath, and that's the girl he's mentioned in the postcard. So Holly again twigs that, yeah, this is a bit suspicious. This suspect now meets this girl, and then she's convicted for a murder. And again, there's more coincidental stuff with people she knows getting killed. So Don, who, this random guy at first, we're not quite sure who he is at first, but he goes out and shoots, like, I think it's Maria's like brother and uncle. And I mean, okay, on the face of it, it's kind of him getting revenge and just killing the people near her, but it's maybe a bit odd that he would go to that extreme. So again, is he being controlled? We're not too sure, but that we kind of see that. So there's further connections with each sort of suspect, and at this point, I'm kind of convinced that none of them are guilty. That there's something else, but certainly, I mean, these two and Terry, there's a lot of doubt over him. But anyway, again, Holly's very persuasive when she talks to Ralph about, I've got to go to New York. There's this another case that's similar. So she follows that up, and she actually talks to Maria in prison. And Maria's like, yeah, I've been convicted of this crime, and I've never even met these two twins. And Holly immediately starts telling her about Heath. And yeah, then she basically believes her. And I mean, an interesting line from Maria is that she says, I believe then it's just God's wish that I'm in here. I know I haven't committed any crime, but it's just his plan for me. And she seems very religious, and it's interesting just how content she is, the fact that she's not really bitter. I mean, obviously she makes it clear I didn't do this, but she's not bitter at all. She just says that's just God's plan and I just accept it. And it's almost like this idea of, if you are religious in any way, even if you get a raw deal and you believe it's part of God's plan, you're not really going to argue with it. You're not going to really be upset or question faith. You just going to go along with it and say, well, it's part of God's work. So it's a fascinating idea, and it kind of sort of has importance later on with something that Holly brings up. So I'll get to that. But anyway, Holly shows Maria, like the photographs of, I wasn't sure if it was Heath or Heath and his brother, because I think they are meant to be twins. It might have just been two photos of Heath, I wasn't sure. And Maria says, yeah, I've seen this guy. He kept hassling me. He kept trying to like chat me up, get me to go out with him. And she hinted, I think, that she was lesbian, because she sort of says, I'm not really into guys, but she says it's just one of those situations where he kept like pressuring me. So in the end, I just kind of agreed to go for a drink with him or something like that. And then it was kind of the next morning I'd just get rid of him. And I wasn't quite sure. It was a bit conflicting because then we go back to the diner scene, which the episode opened with, and so we see Maria with Heath in the diner having breakfast. But then we sort of saw them having sex as well, and from what Maria was saying, it didn't seem to suggest they actually had sex. It seemed to be then because she wasn't into him, she found a way or maybe she was just saying, okay, she decided to sleep with him and then sort of lose him the next day. But if she wasn't interested, I don't know why she would do that. So I wasn't sure if it was one of those like contradiction type visuals where she was saying something different than what we saw on screen. So we actually saw them having sex. So yeah, there is some connection, and another, she did meet him, and then another suspicious detail was then Maria is saying that similar things have been happening to her in prison as what was happening to Heath before he killed himself. So all these spooky like connections and connotations. So really, really interesting stuff, and it builds towards the end of the episode with, and this is where the title comes from, with Holly talking to, I think it's meant to be her mother. And speaking of that, we get another flashback with Holly, so we're very much in her headspace. So we get a flashback with her having a brain scan or something like that. And obviously we've established then Holly's condition was something which they couldn't explain from a very young age. So they're obviously having a brain scan to try and figure it out. And the only important thing about it was the fact that she had this doll with her, some sort of freaky, it was freaky to be honest, but it almost had a look of a voodoo type doll. Certainly that kind of look, and she had it with her during the scan or the operation or whatever it was meant to be. And then we sort of flash to the present day, and she's in the back of the taxi, and it's when she's going to New York, and she sees a similar sort of like doll or figure like hanging in the taxi. So it's just one of these spooky coincidences, and it sort of like jerks something in her, and then there's this weird sort of coincidence where the taxi driver can't take her any further, and she has to get like, I think it's like the bus or the train. But it strikes me that Holly's one of these characters who maybe doesn't believe in coincidence, maybe believes that everything is connected. But in any case, we build towards the end of the episode, and Holly is talking to, I think it's her mother or maybe some relative, and her mother makes like the parallel between this case and this legend, which is El Coco. And it's a legend that's basically been passed down generation to generation, and it's some kind of like supernatural type boogeyman. But it's just, a warning to kids: if they don't behave, it'll come after you. And Holly remembers it, and her mother says, yeah, it was told to me, and it's been passed down the generations. And the important thing about it is that she says it's something where, according to the legend, it's like a human. It takes on human form, but it's not actually a human. And she just makes this parallel between this and the case, and Holly obviously gets right on it. She's on the computer looking at all these different legends, these like myth type things. She types El Coco into the search engine, and what comes up is this character in a mask, or not a mask, sorry, a hood, like a cloak, which is obviously, I think what's going to be important is that it's the character which we've been seeing around these different crime scenes, and which I think the daughter of Glory has been seeing. So I think that's where we're going with. But this basically is how the episode ends, and it knocks Holly knocks her sock off. Basically, she like goes into the bath water because she's in the bath. But yeah, wow, pretty just fascinating. She's seeing all these like weird sort of mythical like myths on the internet, but it's really great stuff. It's really intriguing. But there's other little pieces. So we get a bit more with Ralph, and he decides to look again at like the two separate footages in the Terry case, like the night of the murder. So him in the strip club and him in the other location. I think it was at that like conference. And he keeps looking at it over and over again. And then suddenly in the strip club, he like they freeze frame it and they move in closer on when he's basically talking to the Paddy Considine character who owns the club. And they pinpoint the hand, and the hand seems to like scrape the strip club owner. It seems to like scratch him or something like that, like pass something on like a cut. So later on, Ralph goes to talk to, I forget the character's name, but the club owner, and he just mentions what he saw in the footage, and the Constantine character is like, what can I tell you? I don't really remember that much about that night. So he doesn't have anything else for him, but maybe he's like covering something up. He's not telling the truth. You get that impression. Sort of think this lead can't be totally dead, or it's not for nothing, if you like. But anyway, it doesn't come for anything. The other big part on the side of Ralph's on his side of the plot is that the boy who was the driver of the van, which appears to have been used to commit the crime, he comes back in and says he wasn't completely truthful before. Then he did see something in the car park, someone. So he tells this to Ralph, and Ralph gets him to draw it. And again, this connects to the Holly stuff because it seems to be the character in the hood that he saw. So that's what he draws. So that's what comes of that side. You don't get that much of Ralph in this episode. So the only other two things I think is that we get a bit more with Glory, and I think it's just showing again the impact that this stuff is having on her and her family, and yeah, just the pressure and stuff. So in particular, we see her like throw out a reporter who's trying to get a story, trying to trick her into giving her a story. And the other big scene, which feels a bit random, but they're in a restaurant, and this man starts like mouthing off at her, just giving her abuse because obviously of what Terry supposedly did. And then he makes a threat. He almost makes like a direct threat saying, oh, you want to be careful, leaving your kids at home or something like that. So it kind of gets out of hand. And then the Bill Camp character, the lawyer, he's there also. And this seemed a bit odd for me because Ralph is in the same restaurant, so I thought that's a bit too much of a coincidence that he's there anyway. But what basically happens is Ralph and the lawyer gets rid of this guy. And again, we see a little bit more of Ralph maybe going a bit overboard with the violence, really getting up in this guy's face. But anyway, it's just another it doesn't really have anything to do with the case, but just a little scene to sort of sell, the fallout from what's happened with Terry and kind of the impact on his family. And the only other stuff is with Jack, and we get little bits and pieces, so we're not quite clear what's happening with him at the moment. But obviously, last week we had the stuff with him and him in the barn, and suddenly, like, he got a mark from like this like supernatural entity. So, and he's obviously had been traumatized, and he started saying, "I'll do whatever you want me." So in this episode, it cuts back and forth, just little scenes with him where he seems to be acting out of character. He seems to be being controlled, although some of the stuff he's doing isn't really out of character, because we see him go hunting and obviously shooting more animals, although there's one particular, like, late on, because he goes to like a hardware store, I think, at one point, and he just goes on this big shopping spree, like all these, I think, weapons or something like that anyway. And then in the next scene, after he's gone hunting, like, it's like a deer or some sort of animal is like just left really sort of bloodied, like excessive, not just if he just went hunting regularly. And that kind of goes back to the first episode where we saw like an animal just really, really badly killed around the crime scene. So, but just little pieces with Jack. Another scene is that he's in his office at the police station, and he knows, the other characters who know Ralph, but the officer who's pregnant just walks in and kind of, because he's acting a bit suspicious, but she reminds him about like her baby shower. I think it's baby shower or party because of her being pregnant. And she just reminds him and just says, what's going on? You've been staring at the screen since you got in. And that's it. He's literally staring at the screen. He's barely like reacting to her as well, even though he says, yeah, I'll be at the party. So just acting really weird. But obviously we know he's being controlled by this like presence, but we're not quite sure yet what he's being made to do and quite where this is going. But there you have it. That's the episode. Really, really intriguing stuff. Again, some meaty like ideas and things going on. Again, we got plenty of Holly, which is a great thing. And it's bubbling on nicely. 4 episodes in, and it's really holding up. And I was saying earlier, actually, to Mum, it sort of does make me want to read the novel, actually. I think it would be interesting to read a more recent Stephen King novel and to sort of compare and contrast it to this series. But so far it's right on the money. This is right up my alley, and if it keeps it up and can stick the landing, I think this is going to be one of the best shows of 2020. So really great stuff. That's my review of episode 4 of The Outsider. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Obviously next week I will be back with episode 5, a review of that around about the same time. Just other TV stuff. Soon, I promise, I'll be reviewing the latest Sabrina, as in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. That's, part 3 anyway, they're calling it. Also, I've been doing, obviously, things like Aris. I've been doing my top 50 sci-fi lists in parts, so I've recently put part 4 up. I've started on Picard, the new Star Trek spin-off, so a whole bunch of things up on the channel recently that you can check out now. But anyway, as I said, like and subscribe. Get me up on Twitter if you want. and also ring the bell. There's a bell on YouTube you can ring to remind you when a new video is up on the channel. But thanks for listening or watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.